City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded May 12, 2025.
All right, I'll call a meeting of the Finance Committee to order at 8:02 p.m. Who's taking? Marcy, take our roll.
Christensen.
Here.
Morrow.
Here.
Shuda.
Here.
Keemer. Here. Roderick. Here.
All right, thank you. First item on our agenda this evening, as I scroll up, is a presentation and discussion on the capital planning, project planning, debt capacity, overall financial planning, and tax levy impacts. I did meet with Comptroller Laddick last week, and he shared some very interesting information. I asked, and he was more than willing to share this. I think it's very informative, so I'll turn it over to Corey. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Well, thank you. And, I'll apologize in advance. Some of the conclusions that we come to with this presentation are a little bit difficult. Certainly, it is going to strain our financial capacity to do two major capital projects at the same time with both City Hall and Business 51. So if you find yourself not liking some of the conclusions here, just so you know, I didn't like a lot of the conclusions either that I came to, but it's kind of the situation that we're working with. So the first slide, wanted to first talk about why do we issue debt, because especially I think this is a question that a lot of members of the public have, and there's a couple of reasons. One of the big ones is, so we have special funds such as TIF districts, such as our subdivision fund, that are outside of the tax levy, and the point is that it's not the tax levy that should support them, it's other activities that support them. And so sometimes we need to issue debt for, let's say, paying an upfront development incentive, but we don't have the revenue from that TIF development right away. We get that through the tax revenue that's paid over time. Also, subdivision, another perfect example where we had an initial expense to put the subdivision in. We didn't want to charge taxpayers for that subdivision construction. That really wouldn't have been right or fair. We wanted it to be repaid with the lot sales, so we had to borrow money in 1 year to build the subdivision, and then that debt will get repaid with lot sales. 56% of our total outstanding debt is actually either TIF district debt or subdivision debt. So debt that's not being paid by the general tax levy, but is being paid for with other sources. The other big reason why we issue debt is debt repayment is exempt from levy limits, while expenses that we don't borrow for are subject to very strict limits. So one of the things that we've done is over time, we've shifted some capital project spending from the operating budget to the capital budget and to borrowing for it, simply because we have one side of the levy that's very tightly restricted, one side of the levy that's not restricted at all. So as we've had difficult budgets, we've had to sort of lean on capital a little bit more than we would like to. If we didn't have levy limits, I think we would be able to fund some more of our capital projects a little bit more on an upfront basis. But of course, with levy limits, there's no restriction on how fast or how slow, we can repay our debt. We can repay debt as quickly as we like. The thing is, it does impact the tax levy. So for instance, if we're looking at borrowing $15 million for a city hall, we could legally put that all on the tax levy in 1 year. But that would be a huge, huge impact to the taxpayers to do that all in 1 year. So that's another reason why we borrow money, is simply so that we can spread out those payments so that we don't have this huge spike in the tax levy, really to stabilize the tax levy. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we always need to keep in mind when we're talking about finances is financial stability. And I really like this definition from the United Nations of sustainability, which is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think that certainly is something that we need to keep in mind as we're talking about capital planning, as we're talking about managing debt. As far as how our debt has trended, between 2007 and 2013, there was a pretty big increase in debt. It actually quadrupled over that time period. And at that time, we had to have some pretty difficult conversations to say, this just isn't sustainable, that's when we really came up with the idea that, okay, any new borrowing has to be tied to how much we're repaying in principal every year. And as you can see, we really leveled out that growth in the debt between 2013 and 2020, 2021. And then recently, debt has increased to an extent, and part of that is just the amount of projects that we're doing. For instance, last year we had to borrow additional money to put in the subdivision infrastructure. We had to borrow money to do Badger Avenue in TIF District 9, and then also now that we're doing capital budgets where we're borrowing more than what we're repaying in principal, that also adds to the increase. Of course, we do have a long-term plan to bring that back into balance, which I think is important. So, talking about debt capacity, typically because debt is repaid with property taxes, when we look at debt capacity, we're looking at, okay, what's your property tax base, what's your equalized value, and how much debt can that support? So right now, we have a city ordinance limit that will only use 3% of equalized value, which means that our total ordinance limit right now is $85 million. And right now, we've got about $44 million outstanding for an available capacity of $41 million under our ordinance. There's also a limit by state statute. That limit is 5% of equalized value. That, of course, would give us a lot of extra flexibility if we went beyond our ordinance limit, but I certainly wouldn't recommend that, and I'll get into sort of that on a future slide. So if you look at sort of what we have available, we're using about half of our current capacity under the ordinance limit. And then about half is available, a little bit less than half is available. So if we go to the next slide, you can see sort of how we rank in comparison to other cities. So you can see that the outstanding amount of debt to equalized value ranges from about 1% to about 2.75%, going from Plover on the low end to Neenah on the high end. And Stevens Point, we're at about 1.55%. So we're actually right in range. You can see that we sit pretty well with our comparables. Yep, that's right there. Now, if you look at our ordinance limit, that 3%, that's actually the highest. We don't have any of our comparables at 3%. So if we're talking about, sometimes I hear, well, we have an ordinance limit, we could always change the ordinance, and we could, but we're just getting into some very lonely territory in terms of changing that ordinance limit, because we're really going into territory where none of our comparables currently are. So that's why I would recommend that we stick with the 3% ordinance limit. It's there to really kind of discipline ourselves, and it's been long-standing, and it's been a long-standing goal to keep it there. 10-year versus 20-year borrowings for tax levy supported debt. We typically borrow for 10 years or less. One of the reasons why is we get a lower interest rate if we only borrow for 10 years versus if we go for 20 years, it's going to be about 0.5% more in terms of what you're going to see tacked onto that interest rate. And that's simply because investors, we have a lot of investors who are like short-term, to tie their money up short-term so we can get better interest rates. If you're asking for 20 years, that is a little bit of an issue where they ask for a higher interest rate. So we can still borrow for 20 years, but we're going to pay more for it. It also helps with our bond rating. It really sends a certain message where, that we have fiscal discipline, that we're serious about repaying our debt. It helps with our debt capacity, and really this plan is based on 10-year debt because we have so much coming down the pipe with capital projects that we need to be somewhat aggressive in repaying debt so that it makes room for new capital projects that are planned in 2028 and 2029. I would note for TIF debt, we occasionally borrow for up to 20 years just to time those cash flows with the time the cash inflows with the cash outflows with the TIF district. And also, currently, 92% of our debt is scheduled to be repaid in the next 10 years. And that's something that I'm very proud of. The bond rating agencies look very favorably on that, that's an aggressive repayment schedule. It shows that we definitely have fiscal discipline in the city. So, looking to the future, I tried to figure out, okay, can we make it to 2029 with the amount of money that we have to put into renovating a city hall and with doing the Business 51 project. So I projected those capital needs. It doesn't include any contingency for cost increases or unanticipated needs. Also, it doesn't include any assumptions for increases in equalized value. Now, we might have some increases in equalized value which would grow that debt capacity, so that would be a benefit. However, the other thing that I don't have in this plan is any contingency for cost increases or unanticipated needs. So I felt like the two kind of offset that, okay, we'll likely, hopefully grow our equalized value, although we never know. Equalized values can also go down in the case of a real estate market downturn. But hopefully any increases that we see in equalized value would offset some of the other increases that we might see, especially in this current inflationary environment. So looking at anticipated capital spending through 2029, we've got a list of things. First of all, we've got a capital imbalance where we're borrowing more than we're repaying in principal currently, so I calculated what that would be through 2029. That's about $7.4 million that'll add to the debt. And of course, if you remember that plan, around 2032, we'll have right-sized that where we'll be in balance with that the amount that we're borrowing will match what we're repaying in principal. I've got $15 million as a placeholder for the City Hall renovation. Upfront TIF incentives, I estimated that at $7 million. One of those is a development incentive already agreed to or tentatively agreed to, and then the rest of that is just planning for the future. I anticipate we will need to make some upfront development incentives as opportunities come along. We've got the TID 9 rail extension in East Park Commerce Center for $7 million. That project, we're not sure if it's going to happen or not. It really depends on the needs of the East Park Commerce Center, but I wanted to have it in here because if we don't have it in here and then we need it, we haven't accounted for it, we don't have any room to do it. Also, we have the property purchase of Chase Bank for $3 million, and then moving on, we get into the Business 51 phases. The north side, Business 51 is planned for next year. That would be $9.1 million. And then we go into, and even though that's a TIF project, we'll still have to borrow for it. So it still impacts our borrowing capacity. And then, I'm not going to read them all to you. I think, you can read them on the screen. But as you can see, here are the amounts for the various phases as we move through 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029. And then wanted to note, as of right now, don't have anything in there for Shopko site improvements, for an aquatic center, for Goerke Park, or for other facilities besides City Hall. Now, of course, we might have some projects that come up as far as, the roof needs to be replaced on this building, or the HVAC system needs to be redone in this building. And those projects, hopefully we can fit into regular capital. So for the purposes of this analysis, we're just talking about really major, extraordinary projects outside of the $9 to $10 million that we usually spend on an annual basis for our capital plan. So that leaves us with a remaining balance of negative $31 million, almost negative $32 million. Now, the good news is we do have some offsetting reductions in terms of TIF debt that's going to be repaid through 2029. I calculated both our existing TIF debt, which is almost $10 million that would be repaid, new projected TIF debt, $7.4 million, future City Hall debt. By 2029, we'd be repaying almost $4 million of that. We've got future Business 51 debt that would be repaid by 2029. We will have some TIF funds on hand to construct both the north section of Business 51 as well as Phase 1 of the southern segment, so that's offsetting. And then the other thing is, working with the numbers, right now we spend $5 million a year on road projects. And usually that gets us about 2 big road projects a year. I'm showing that we'd have to reduce that by at least $2 million in order to make the numbers work. So there's just no way that we can afford to do Business 51 plus an additional $5 million like we would usually do for road construction projects. Certainly we can talk about what that number needs to be. For purposes of this, I knew that I needed to reduce it to at least $3 million just to make the numbers work, and then that gives us a projected debt capacity at the end, a little bit under $3 million. So we do make it, barely, without any room to spare, but we do make it. And then looking at the potential solution of reducing the road projects, just wanted to take a slide to illustrate that. We can cut it back further, but we need to consider the future condition of our infrastructure as well, and it's a little bit daunting to say we won't touch, roads for another 5 years, but, we can certainly have discussions.
Mr. Mayor.
And just to interrupt, because this is pothole season, there's nothing like the influx of road maintenance complaints that come in this time of the year. We've already talked with Director Badoon. Right now we're doing, as you can see there, almost 4.25 million in road reconstructs. On the years that we need to, we would reduce the road reconstruction and we'd do an overlay. So that's basically just taking off a couple of inches of asphalt and putting new asphalt over it. But it wouldn't be a total reconstruct, but it would get you another 15, 20 years out of the life of the road. So your staff is always working on ways to save that money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And really, some of the south segment of the Business 51 is going to address a lot of the utilities, the roads that have the worst utilities underneath them. So there still will be a lot of work being done, improving infrastructure and all of those
That'll
things.
all be Business 51, right?
Yeah, but that'll be going out of the Business 51 project.
Yep, absolutely. And then kind of one of the open questions that I have, and we can certainly discuss it, is, is there any impact if the Department of Public Works is able to get any future grants? That then opens up some money. Is there an incentive there where we say, okay, part of that could then go back into road construction, if you can bring in some money? So that's something that, certainly we can discuss. But I think right now, I certainly know that the Department of Public Works is looking for some direction on this, because they're already planning, for 2026 and looking at, okay, what are we going to do for 2026? What are we going to design? And right now, they don't know how much money they have. In the past, we've been able to tell them, well, you can expect about the $5 million. But
I think your recommendation of reducing it from 5 to 3, I think it's unrealistic to think it's going to go from 5 to 0. But I think there's going to be at least $3 million worth of projects. And I think that that's a pretty realistic expectation.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I guess I would defer to Public Works absolutely for their recommendations on how to do that. But I could see, the years that we're doing the north side of Business 51, instead of doing a south and a north reconstruction, just do a south. We're already doing reconstruction in the north. Same thing when we do the south segment of Business 51, maybe just do a reconstruct on the north. And again, I would defer to Public Works because I know they have very data-driven, in ways that they make those decisions. But
I did have a quick conversation with Director Badoon, and I asked this specific question. If it was reduced from $5 million to 3, he said they could make $3 million work. He said we're not going to be able to keep up with the pace that we wanted to, but that would allow them to address the major issues in that 4-year time frame. So I think that's probably just as going forward. And, you never know. Something could all of a sudden, infrastructure underneath someplace it blows up and you've got to replace the infrastructure, the water and the sewer and the roads and, things could, but I think this is a good guideline.
Don't say blows up.
Okay,
No.
good.
A gas main or something.
Could happen.
Yeah, you never know, so for
Directional
sure.
drilling.
Yeah, so then looking to 2030, so wanted to see, okay, can we get through, 2030, now that we've made it to 2029? We'd have starting debt capacity a little bit under 3 million. That's another Business 51 year, so again, under this example, we do 3 million instead of 5 million, so that frees up $2 million. Plus, now by 2030, we've got the additional debt repayment going on with, paying off City Hall, paying off some of those phases of Business 51. So that's about $4.7 million. So that leaves a total available of about 9.6. But then we've got the Business 51 Central segment, which is 5.7. So you end up with remaining debt capacity a little bit under $4 million. So it does work, but again, that points to trying to keep everything on 10-year financing so that we are able to repay debt fast enough so that we're rebuilding that capacity to do the 2030 segment of Business 51. Okay, now for maybe the hard part of the conversation is the tax levy implications of various projects, and we have the tax levy implications of City Hall if we do $15 million 10-year financing. If we look at, for a median valued home, we'd be looking at $152 just for to cash flow that $15 million debt service, and then plus we have our regular annual increase of 4.5, which is another $77 on, again, $194,000 median valued home. So you're looking at a total impact of $229 in 1 year. So note that that's just for the city portion of the tax bill. It doesn't include the county, the school district, or the tech college. We'll see what they do as well, but they might have other increases that they tack on also. Looking at that, thought that was maybe a little bit high, so one of the ideas that I came up with is, well, maybe we could phase in that impact of that $15 million borrowing over 2 years. However, if we're going to do that, we need to start with the tax bills that go out this coming December. And then for a median valued home of $194,000, you're looking at $76 for City Hall, and then you're looking at the additional 4.5% increase for ongoing operations, which would be $77. So then you're looking at $153 for that $194,000 median valued home. So hopefully that's a little bit more manageable. And then going through the implications of Business 51 for the phase that's going to fall on the tax levy. And of course, we don't know about additional grant funding. Additional grant funding for Business 51 could certainly change this, but just to give you an idea of if we don't get grant funding, what does a phase of Business 51 look at? It took Business 51 South Phase 2, $6.8 million, 10-year financing. It'd be $69 on a $194,000 median valued home. Then plus you have your regular 4.5%, $77 increase. So then you're looking at a total of $146 on that $194,000 home. So as far as the schedule of the tax rate impacts, I wanted to kind of map this out for you so you could see why we would need to start in December of this year if we want to split City Hall in half in terms of the tax impacts. And that's because you can see then December 2025 and 2026 would be each 1/2 of City Hall, and then you're getting into the different Business 51 phases. So if we don't start right away in December of 2025, then we'd be mixing City Hall with some additional debt for Business 51 as well, and then you're kind of doubling up and you have too much of a spike in 1 year. Going on to the next slide. So what about fund balance, savings, is that a solution? In my opinion, there's not really enough fund balance to meaningfully help the situation. We're still working on getting a final number for year-end 2024, but for year-end 2023, we had about $13 million in fund balance. The minimum under our policy is that we have 33% of our general fund budget in unassigned fund balance, which gets us a little bit under $10 million in terms of what we're required to have under the policy. So that's a difference of $3.2 million. Obviously, I don't want to say that $3.2 million isn't a lot of money, but we're talking about a debt increase of going from 44 million to 85 million. So in the big scheme of things, in terms of how large these projects are, it's just not enough to really meaningfully move the needle. And the other issue that we have is we want to manage our bond rating. Fund balance is helpful for our bond rating. And by the way, fund balance refers to our savings or our reserves, for those who aren't familiar with that term. Also, fund balance is used to support the operating budget with interest income, which we've become increasingly reliant on. And also, I believe it's a proper financial strategy because we are able to make more on our savings than what we pay in interest currently. So because there's a higher interest rate that we can get on savings than what we pay on our borrowing, our lowest cost of financing really is to borrow the money rather than using our savings.
Chair, may I?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
I'll try to explain this clearly, or ask this clearly. How does fund balance affect our net debt, if at all? I mean, even though we wouldn't necessarily spend 13 million of our unassigned reserves to pay off our debt, does that change our debt capacity if we theoretically have money in savings or does it have no influence or impact at all?
It doesn't have any influence or impact on
Okay.
our debt capacity in terms of, basically our debt limit that's based on our equalized value. So
Okay.
it's not considered to offset,
Okay.
your debt for the purposes that we, use for measuring whether we're in compliance with the state statutory limit
Okay.
or the ordinance limit. Now, of course, I think the bond rating agencies do definitely look at it as far as how much do you have in savings,
Sure.
how much do you have in debt,
Okay.
and they definitely take it into consideration that we do maintain a strong fund balance, so
Okay.
that helps kind of offset that, and hopefully they'll take that into consideration as we increase our debt.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so getting into a little bit more of the bond rating. So our most recent bond rating, they said there's two factors that could lead to a downgrade. One was deterioration of reserves or liquidity, in other words, fund balance. And, that's something that hopefully we should be able to avoid. The other was significant increase in long-term liabilities and fixed costs. Unfortunately, as you can see from the analysis, we're going to have a pretty big increase in debt, in terms of really pushing it to near the maximum of our ordinance limit. So that's probably unavoidable if we want to do the capital projects as planned. One of the key points here is I hate to check both boxes. They're basically saying there are two things that could get you downgraded. I hate to do both. So that's just something to keep in mind strategically. So basically, for bond rating impacts, increasing debt may result in a rating downgrade. There's no way around that. Of course, it's a third party, so I don't know exactly what they're going to do, but it certainly may have an impact on our bond rating. That will result in higher interest rates for the money that we borrow. Now, a couple of years ago, we asked our financial advisor, what does that actually look like in terms of costs? And they did an analysis on a hypothetical $5 million 20-year bond and said, what's the increase in costs over the life of the bond? If we have a one-notch downgrade, that cost is $35,000 over the life of the bond. If we have a two-notch downgrade, that would be $129,000 because a lot of investors want at least a AA rating, and if we get downgraded 2 notches, we're no longer AA, we're actually single A, we'd be A1, which would really jump the interest rates. So if we look at our bond rating comparables, you can see right now, and this is something that I'm very proud of, that we are 1 notch ahead of Marshfield, Wausau, and Wisconsin Rapids. So looking at what a 1-notch downgrade does, basically it puts us in line with our comparables, which is something that I'm not happy about, but it's something that I think if we had to live with, we could. And we could still justify, well, we're in line with our regional comparables in terms of a bond rating. Of course, you're looking at the $35,000 more. Now, if we got 2 downgrades and we went down to an A1, a single A rating, then we would be below all of our comparables in terms of a bond rating. You're looking at significantly more interest costs, and in my mind, that I believe is just unacceptable. I don't want to see that happen, so I think a key strategy is to say, okay, if we're going to chance that we could have 1 downgrade, maybe we can handle that, but we can't have 2 downgrades, and we need to plan accordingly to make sure that that doesn't happen. So going to the next slide, kind of like I just said, we need to draw the line at a AA3 rating. And how do we do that? We stick with the ordinance limit on debt of 3% of equalized value. We maintain stable fund balance, and we keep debt repayment to 10 years or less when possible. That helps with our bond rating. It also helps make the current plan work.
Right.
One kind of side note, I wanted to just mention that, you know, the governor made a budget proposal a few months ago, and one of the implications of it, and it doesn't look like this is going to pass at this point, but just something to have on our radar screen, is he proposed an incentive program for municipalities and counties to freeze their local tax levies, and then basically there'd be a new state aid program where the state would provide an aid payment based on what 3% of your levy is, so that it would basically make up for foregoing a 3% levy increase. It would put you in the same place. It's a nice gesture. The problem with that is that our plans involve increases that are much more significant than that. An increase, you know, in state aid equal to 3% of our levy is not going to get done what we need to have done in terms of for City Hall and for Business 51 and for bringing our debt and our capital back into balance. So currently the legislature is expected to reject this proposal, so you might say, well, why worry about it? I'm a little concerned just that it's an indication of sort of some of the political winds right now, which I think are sensitive to property taxes, and what you've had happen in Stevens Point has happened all over the state, where there's been a redistribution where residential property values have gone up quite a bit and residential property owners have gotten hit pretty hard. So I'm just a little nervous about what we're going to see from the state in the future. It's a potential risk. I can't tell you what the state's going to do. I can't try to predict what the state legislature will do in the future, but it is a risk to this overall plan if they try to put something in place, either a carrot or a stick. You know, they could certainly say, well, we're going to make levy limits apply to both sides of the levy, not just to the operating side, but to the debt service side as well. And if that happens, that's a pretty significant risk. And, you know, when we talk about risk, sometimes we talk about what's the probability of this happening and what's the severity. Probability, you can kind of argue the probability, but the severity would be very high, especially if it's something that remains in place for a long time. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that that's a potential risk.
But Corey, isn't it also accurate that part of our problems is created by a decrease in shared revenues, so the local taxes have had to share a larger share of the burden?
Yes.
Had to shoulder it? I mean, it's, so their tax cuts at the state level have really been more of a tax shift to the local taxes. It really hasn't been a tax cut. There's still essential services that have to be provided.
Yes, absolutely. So,
If I could do, on the same coin, there are some vocal opponents to TIF incentives, saying that they are, we heard it tonight, that we're spending it on luxury apartments. That's not true, first of all. But the TIF incentives is a tool that we are able to use to make sure that our net new construction happens, and incentivize the developers to do it here. We can always say, no TIF incentives, but they're not going to build it anyway in most cases. They're going somewhere else. And there's plenty of examples of that. So the TIF is a tool. Is it ideal? No, but we also need to use that to make sure that the levy limits that are imposed with the net new construction, we have to have net new construction. If we don't, we're going to die.
Right.
And this year's not going to be great. So it's important that we use the tools that are available to us while they're available.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's frustrating that it seems like the state's solution is always to put the squeeze on the local municipalities. And there are a lot of other ways that they can deal with this problem. One would be state aid and being more robust with state aid. Another is some states have assessment limits that limit how much residential assessments can go up in a certain year. That's another kind of creative solution that some states have, but that Wisconsin does not currently have. That certainly would have helped with some of the tax shifts that you have from commercial properties to residential properties. So, okay, so basically, if we look at this, sort of strategically, I look at it like we've got three competing priorities overall. And, we've got the priority of our financial condition, we've got the capital projects that we want to get done, and we've got hopefully a reasonable tax rate, or as reasonable as we can make it. And I kind of put a star in the middle. I guess it's kind of hard to see on that screen, but to say, right now I think this plan is probably right in the middle. Now, strategically, we can move that around. So for instance, if you feel that we don't want to take as much of a risk on losing our bond rating and we want to put our financial condition in a better place, we can certainly do that, but then you're moving on that triangle, you're moving away from some of the other priorities of the reasonable tax rate and the capital projects that you want to get done, because you're probably talking about doing less capital projects and being more aggressive on repaying debt. That would help our financial condition, but it moves away from the other priorities. The same thing with capital projects versus reasonable taxes. They're kind of two different competing priorities. We can certainly do less capital projects and not hit the tax levy so hard, or if you feel like we want to do more capital projects, we can do that, but then there's the tax impact. So I just wanted to throw that out there just as a sort of the way I'm kind of thinking about this, in terms of we've got three competing priorities and trying to hopefully have a balance. And certainly we can talk about, okay, do we think that this is balanced, or are there adjustments that we need to make? But of course understand that when you're gaining somewhere, you're kind of losing somewhere else. So looking to the future beyond 2030, I know that this presentation maybe didn't have some of the best, conclusions in terms of some of the things that are coming, but beyond 2030, I think we are starting to look a little bit better, because we'll have completed our two major capital projects of City Hall and Business 51. We should be repaying more in principal than what we are borrowing annually. We can use that to bring the debt back down and hopefully regain our bond rating. Also, I'm hoping that we can achieve a proper pace for road resurfacing and reconstruction. Currently, that's 1.6 miles a year. It should be 3.2 miles a year for a 45-year replacement cycle. And then one of the big positives that we have happening in the 2030s is we're closing major TIF districts, including TIF District 5 and TIF District 9. And that will allow that additional tax base to support either more tax levy or to support tax relief. So my long-term plan is, at that point, I'd probably like to redo our original capital analysis from 2016, when we looked at where are we truly with all of our capital projects and what do we truly need to spend to maintain the city. And then I think that can kind of inform what we do with that extra property tax base, if we use that to increase the levy further, or if we don't need to do that and we can allow for some tax relief. And then expanding a little bit on the proper pace for road surfacing reconstruction. Currently have 144 miles of road. We're currently replacing 1.6 miles a year, which is a 90-year replacement cycle. It really should be 3.2 miles per year, which would be a 45-year replacement cycle. Our original capital analysis that identified this gap was done in 2016. Now, in fairness, we've had a lot of challenges since then. That was based on 2016 prices. We've had a lot of cost increases that have really moved that goalpost, which is why we're not quite where we need to be on, in terms of the pace of road reconstruction. But I'm really hoping by 2031 that, that will have been 15 years since we originally analyzed that issue, that we will be able to solve it by then, or if not, somewhere in the mid-2030s when we close those TIF districts. And also, in fairness to us, when we originally did that 2016 plan, we did about a half a mile of road reconstruction or resurfacing a year, which was a 285-year replacement cycle. So even though 90 years, is still not where we need to be. We got it from half a mile in 285 years to 1.6 miles in 90 years. So I don't want to be all negative. We have made progress, even if we're still not exactly where we need to be. So with that, specific feedback that I'd like from the council, and we've already heard some of it in terms of the pace of other road reconstruction, but would like a feedback on the list of projects, both what is included and what is not currently included. Keep in mind that right now we're pretty much maxed out, but certainly take feedback on that, and it doesn't have to be tonight. We can certainly talk about this at June Finance as well. A decision on the non-business 51 road projects for 2026 through 2030. We already kind of discussed that. It sounds like we have a preliminary consensus anyway. A decision on implementing half of the projected increase for City Hall for December 2025 tax bills. I think that that's a good idea to soften that blow, but we'll need to plan debt repayment schedules accordingly, so that's something that I want to make sure that we get it all on the same page on, and then any other questions, concerns, or thoughts. So.
Excellent presentation. Thank you, sir. Questions, comments from the committee? All right. Very informative.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
That takes care of our non-action item. We go to number 3 on our agenda, approval of a land swap agreement with Portage County for the exchange of various properties, including 1039 Ellis Street and the city's ownership interest in the City Hall Courthouse building.
Absolutely. So this is the third public meeting that we've had. Noticed Andrea's not here. So to give you an update, it passed the Plan Commission unanimously. It went to the County Space and Properties, which passed with 1 dissenting vote. It is before you for consideration. I want to make sure people had an opportunity to chime in, give us thoughts. After this, it will go to council on Monday, county board on Tuesday of next week. And then we'll get, provided everything is approved, we'll get the draft agreement done and then start some work, which is the next item on your agenda. So
I would move approval of the land swap agreement with Portage County.
Okay, so we have a motion by Alder Kiemer. Is there a second? Second by Alder Morrow. Comments, questions, comments from the committee first.
We have talked
Thoughts?
and talked.
This is not the
and
first.
doing it sooner rather than later allows us to split that over 2 tax years, which is a big deal.
Absolutely, and it'll make it a lot easier for the taxpayers to absorb it, that increase over a 2-year period. Any comments or questions from the public? It has been discussed quite thoroughly. We have, hearing none, I think we're ready to take a vote on it. All in favor of the motion to approve our land swap with the county would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed would be no. And that passes unanimously. Next item on our agenda, the approval of funding for architectural services for designing a replacement city hall.
So I assume Director
Director Kivala, is that why you're here?
will start us off.
He's freshly back, so it was explained a lot in the memo. We're just looking to
Sure.
get some approvals contingent
Right.
upon a signed agreement, so we can hit the ground running, so to speak.
Correct, yeah, just what the mayor said, obviously with any city hall build-out, we do need to kind of have an outline of what we're doing, and I think right now there's a discussion on, build new versus renovation, to get some better cost estimates to kind of visualize what both of those options could be. We do need to spend a little bit of money for preliminary architectural work, for a design firm to come in and present that to us. So looking for the money to start that off. Once the approval is gained for the land swap and all that's through, and then once we start working with the architectural firm that's selected, which will be brought to council, we'll bring those two options forward, discuss them again, decide on a direction, build new renovation, and then from there we'd go forward with full-blown architectural plan sets, construction documents, things like that. And then with those materials, we'd go out to bid for the actual work. So this is just the start of the process.
I think it'll be very beneficial to get that information in order for us to make wise decisions on which direction to go, whether we're looking at new, whether we're looking at renovation, and so this will give us the good, accurate information to base those decisions on, or if both of them look, and whether there happens to be a plan C that we have to consider if things come too far out of whack. So, thoughts? Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Before we discuss, we should have a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Alder Morrow has the motion to approve, and Alder Kiemer, second. Thoughts from the committee?
I know we had a plan several years ago for a new one, for a new city hall, like 5 years ago, I think it was.
6.
Yeah,
5 or 6 years
maybe a
ago.
little bit longer.
I know that those numbers aren't in the realm anymore. But I think it would be nice to see how much it would cost, and I know that we're going to have a tour, and that we're going to have some site tours to look at the building on Ellis as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I guess I have a question, and it's
Close to the microphone so they can hear you.
It's a little nebulous, so I apologize in advance, Corey. It seems like we are cutting things so close with this idea of trying to manage our debt. That City Hall number being 15 million seems risky in terms of us not really having a super clear idea right now of what the final cost of that project will be, given we're still even discussing if we want to build new or renovate. I mean, what will your process look like if the absolute cheapest any of this could be ends up being 25 million? Like, what is the next step there, right? I think
Then it's Plan C.
Yeah. Then
that's not going to happen.
That's going to send me back to the drawing board to really think about what we're doing and,
How many bedrooms do you have in your place? I mean, offices. How many offices? So, and Alderperson, if I might, it was asked to find out the cost of building new versus renovating, and we talked to a couple of contractors, and of course, everything's a ballpark because they don't have specifics.
Right.
But generally, you're speaking about $400 to $500 per square foot for a build, as opposed to about $250 a square foot for a renovate. I can't see us having a cheaper option than renovating the existing building.
I guess I maybe mean to make a more general point that I think we should be prepared for a situation where even the cheapest option might end up being more than expected, and kind of understanding what happens in that case.
Then I would see two options. One would be to find an option C, maybe a different existing building or something. I mean, or that would just put us into a financial situation where we would be right at the very, very limit, and it would end up having implications as far as bond ratings and interest income and a number of things. So I think it behooves us to try to avoid either of those scenarios if possible. But this will give us information to be able to make those decisions. So, any questions or comments from the public? All right. Hearing none, we'll take the vote. All in favor of providing the funding for the architectural services for design and replacement City Hall would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And opposed would be no,
Up to $75,000 contingent on the agreement.
as presented, yes.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Then we're down to number 5, the approval of additional funding for the purchase of a fire truck. That's why we have Chief Moody still here, gracing us with his presence.
So yes, I am still here, and I'll be here till the end in the back. Well, I appreciate the approval of the 2025 capital improvement project for our new engine 3, a Pierce purchase of over $950,000 for that apparatus. We have been made aware of some recent changes in the cost by doing the builds so far in advance. Now, we could talk about, well, maybe we shouldn't look at doing those builds so far in advance, but Corey will back me up on this. The financial numbers, when we start looking at the involvement, we were able to take an engine and a squad in this situation. Instead of purchasing a new squad this year and a new engine next year, we were able to make one purchase instead of two, saving the city an initial $1 million through that process. Also, I was made aware through the build process when I was just over recently to Pierce Manufacturing, the current engine that we spec'd out and purchased for $951,000, if you were to repurchase it at this point, would cost about $1.3 to $1.4 million. So I do believe we're going in the right direction, and I think we need to continue going in that direction with our large purchases being that far in advance, just like DPW and other departments do here within the city. Some of the changes, because obviously if I'm coming in front of you asking for $19,000, you're going to ask, what are some of those changes on those apparatuses or on that apparatus, or what are we talking about? And it's a lot of little things that add up, and some of the things we couldn't look that far into the future on. So we control our air horns and our sirens by foot pedals on the floors of the apparatuses. We've realized that due to corrosion and salt, it's better to go to a lanyard up on the actual roof of the apparatus. So by making some of those changes, it's costed us a few $100s each way. There are bar graphs now, electronic bar graphs in our valve systems and our pump capabilities. We can read how far the valves are actually open or closed and where we're pumping at for capacities up to 15 to 2,000 gallons per minute of water out of each one of those apparatuses. So it's really crucial that we know where we're gauging and we're not putting somebody at danger inside the fire, and then also making sure that our valves aren't sticking or causing any problems there. We did catch a spec issue for $850 that we needed to have a second discharge, or sorry, an inlet, a large diameter inlet. We also realized that on top of the fire apparatus where we partition our hose, we actually are going to, we found a new safety feature where we're going to belly notch all of those panels so people that are loading the hose up above can reach or go over each partition a lot safer and a lot easier, saving time and being more efficient. Believe it or not, when we ordered this apparatus, we didn't know what type of tires would be available at this point. And so now, because tires are available, we're going to go with a Michelin XD-N2, because that's what we're being recommended to go with, but it's a $3,200 or $3,250 increase. And some of the other issues that we've had with the apparatus that you'll notice on the back of our engines, we've never had ladders to get up onto the back of the apparatus. We've always had just foot notches that you would step on while you go up a side rail. They actually now, due to safety features, have made ladders that actually come off the back at a certain angle, so it's safer to get up on top of the apparatuses to bed the hose or to put equipment away. With this, we've had to change where we can put some of our fire equipment. Instead of that area, we had to move it. So again, each one of those costs $400 or $500 per move. So when you start adding this all up, obviously after building a $1 million apparatus and looking that far into the future, the Stevens Point Fire Department is looking for an additional $19,000 to make the changes needed to continue moving forward with this project and take delivery of Engine 3 by the end of this year.
Okay.
I have what I hope is a quick question. You mentioned in the memo that by moving forward with these changes, you'll be replacing vehicles. Is this that by this vehicle will prevent the purchase of two vehicles, or that you have a current vehicle that will be no longer needed?
So both.
Okay.
So both. Actually, what we're doing is the squad that is currently at Station 1 right now was scheduled to be replaced this year. We were scheduled to take delivery of another engine next year or the year after, and then have the truck come in 28, 29. By doing, what we did was merge the squad and the engine purchase, because I think it's fair, and I think what we need within the Stevens Point Fire Department is doable. We only purchased one apparatus, and so we saved an initial $1 million on not having to purchase two, but one. And yes, when that apparatus arrives this year, we will be getting rid of an apparatus as well at Station 1.
Okay, very good.
So actually, to answer that, both.
Very good.
And that other apparatus gets resold to someone else?
That is correct. And we actually have, I'm going to be working with DPW and Scott Badoon and Chris Johnson, who's in charge of fleet maintenance, because there are some local departments here that are very interested in some of our equipment, because they know obviously how we take care of it, and it fits well within the Mabus division here in Portage County.
Any other questions? Okay.
I have
Is there
a motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Alder Morrow. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alder Broderick. Any other comments from the committee? Any from the public? Hearing none, we'll take our vote. All in favor of appropriating the additional $19,000 for the upgrade to the fire truck would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed would be no. And that passes unanimously. Next item on our agenda, that takes us to, where are we?
6.
Oh, God, it's a long agenda. I'm on the wrong page yet. Approval of funding for capital improvements to the airport. Director Lemke.
Thank you. The abridged version of this is that we did not have our 5-year summary from Bureau of eligible projects at the point where the city did their capital planning. So we've been through a couple iterations of the order to put those things in. In fact, we had a previous iteration approved at the Airport Commission, and since then have changed our approach. And the first project that we'd like to do, and if you look at the list, there's $5.5 million worth of projects in the next 5 or more years. But this one is master planning. Local share ends up being $12,000, which also recently changed. Our local share was 5% of total up until very recently. Now it's down to 2.5%. So this was a $25,000 request a couple weeks ago. So that's really it. We didn't get this in time for capital. Hoping we can allocate some local funds for the local share.
Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Alder Morrow, second. Alder Broderick, seconds. Any questions or anything before we vote? Any comments? I think that's a lot of value for a $12,000 investment, so any comments from the public? Hearing none, we'll take our vote. All in favor of requesting our local share of $12,000 to be allocated would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed would be no. And that passes unanimously. Second page of our agenda gets to item number 7, approval of additional funding for the Goerke Park Press Box project. Director Kramer.
So the memo contains the bid tab for the recent bid project we did for the renovation. Essentially, where this project began, if you remember, this building's 43 years old. So originally built in 1982. When it first went in, it was a stick-built structure. It wasn't climate controlled, and obviously building code was quite a bit different back then. So we set out because we've been taking water on in the press box. So with the multiple millions of dollars of renovations inside the stadium, during our fundraising process, it was identified that our donors essentially were looking for the city to fix that structure ourselves. So we started on a roof kind of redesign, ultimately trying to change the rubber membrane. There's been a lot of changes in the press box through the years. The chancellor, the university updated a chancellor's box. There's been some different HVAC units. Our highest and biggest need is that we have an HVAC unit that is shot on the roof, and we also have a roof that is taking on water. So we started looking at, if you remember, kind of the rebranding of the stadium. The new siding on the Willet is what this structure would look like, so it kind of matched the interior. So what you see in front of you, the largest cost overrun is related to building code. So luckily, our inspection department was willing to review documents on the front end for us, so we weren't at the susceptibility of a change order when we got late into the design. If you look at the actual bid tab, insulation of the structure, which it currently is not, it was not built that way originally, as well as having to change some of the door componentry for exterior and interior, related to just about $80,000 of the overrun. So ultimately what staff's looking to do is to complete the project we've been working on for a few years, but it would require additional funding. Because of the heavy usage with our agreements, we aren't able to just dive into this project. We have to kind of work it around basically football in the fall, as well as track and field in the spring, and then get ready for the next year. So when I talked with Comptroller Laddick, we weren't looking at trying to get the money, right now. What we are looking to do is authorize a contract and then ultimately roll it into the 2026 borrowing or basically leftover money from 2025, depending on how it shakes out. Not great to follow the presentation that was earlier tonight, but ultimately we're at a point where this is what we have to do to keep occupying the building, and that building is full of people for all the athletic events for all seasons. So staff is recommending approval. We did look at, could we do different pieces of it, but essentially when you take the roof off, you have to take a bunch of componentry off. If you're going to insulate the structure, you have to take all the paneling off. So to put the old paneling back up just doesn't make sense. We did price a new structure. They don't sell them prefabbed, climate controlled. So you'd go back to a tin shed and you'd start this whole process over again about upgrading over time. So not a great scenario, but ultimately it will put the kind of the ribbon on this part of Goerke Park, and then we'll see what the future holds for the rest.
Committee, what are your wishes?
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
I'll second.
And Alder Schuter's the second. Alder Keemer with the motion. Comments from the committee?
I mean, what the park is now is really a jewel for the area, really, and I think it's brought in a lot more business for us. It's we've gotten a ton of work out of it. It's really a sight to behold to go there now, as opposed to when my son was in school. It was horrible. But now it's like, it's really nice. It's really something to bring other sports in, and I think this would be a great asset to that.
I just attended a track meet there last week, and that facility is just, it's a shining star. It's impressive. So I think this is kind of, like you said, the kind of the finishing piece to the puzzle. It'll be the bow on the present. So I think it makes sense. Everything else has been done well and right, and I think it just makes sense to do this in that same manner. So I would also be supportive. Any comments?
I guess I would just have Director Kramer remind us. I know with a lot of these projects like Plover River Crossing and Sarah Park and Goerke Park, I mean, a large portion of the expense was donor raised. So, I mean, if you're looking at what % of this project the city is financing versus donor, like what percentages do you put that at?
So if you take the Willett roof off, so the roof was the largest capital expenditure for the city. So we had, if I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, we were around $1 million on the roof. So you take the roof out, we were around $500,000 on that initial $5 million kind of project. So if you roll this in, and then essentially we did have the wall componentry, if you remember, which is about another $100,000. We're going to come in separate of the Willett roof around $1 million on that 5.5 or so on the improvements.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Which is pretty amazing. It really is. But it's also, I think, a good indication of the kind of support we have in the community. So, and a good job rounding up those funds as well. So, any other comments from the committee? Any from the public? Hearing none, we'll take our vote. All in favor of awarding the contract to Milbach Construction and allocating the additional funding in the 2026 capital improvement budget would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed would be no. That is approved. Next item on our agenda, we have the approval of the designation of the official newspaper for city publications.
Yes, so this is an annual process, and we receive bids. This year, we received one bid from the Stevens Point Gazette. They're our current official newspaper of record, and they proposed no increase in costs, so the recommendation is to approve.
So moved.
We have
I'll
a motion
second.
to approve by Alder Morrow, a second by Alder Keemer. Any comments? Any comments from the public? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor of designating having the Portage County Gazette as our official newspaper would signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed would be no. That passes. Item number 9, approval of AECOM change order number 2 for the design of the south segment, Phase 1 of the Business 51 project. Director Badoon.
Really nothing much to add. It's something that we actually knew we needed to do during the other planning phase. It was just a matter of just getting the timing to get it otherwise done right. So we need to do some additional environmental work within the corridor. And besides that, we also need to do some additional title searches just to keep current on those.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a motion?
Hopefully, I'll move to, well, I'll move to approve, but I do have one quick question.
Okay. Ask the question as long as he's right there.
Okay, all right. Based on the environmental findings and what's currently been assessed, is there additional environmental work that needs to be done? Are they?
So that's what we'll find out really from the
Okay.
2.5.
Okay.
From the
Exactly,
borings.
kind of the extent more. So now we're going to do some of the drilling. The first part is really just the record searches and finding out what was otherwise there. That's the phase 1.
Okay.
Now we get into the actual drilling some holes, taking some samples.
Okay.
Sounds boring.
It does.
Oh, borings. We have a motion by Alder Keemer. Alder Morrow was a second. Any other comments from the committee? Questions? Any from the public? Hearing none, we'll take our vote. All in favor of approving the change order number 2 for AECOM for the design of the south segment would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed would be no, and that passes unanimously. Number 10, approval of an agreement with AECOM for the final design of the south segment, phases 2 and 3 of the Business 51 project. Director Badoon.
Yeah, so in the capital planning, if you looked at last year's capital worksheet, you'd otherwise see each year we pretty much have the phases that where we go through design, real estate acquisition and utility, relocation, and then construction. So kind of in that sequence through all the various phases. Talking to AECOM, trying to find ways to otherwise, if we can otherwise save some additional money, looking at that, in addition to just some general efficiencies found by continuously working through the process with us. Which also would be a part of this, is that if we combine those two phases, they felt they could do that for a substantial amount less. So that's what otherwise before you. However, it was more than we had originally budgeted in this current capital year. I think Corey can probably explain to that more. That is that, I don't know it's going to change really our borrowing in the year, but it's just a matter of allocating the funds towards this project to ultimately save about $500,000 in overall design costs.
Okay, Comptroller, is it a good idea to save $500,000?
I think so, in my opinion.
All right. Good. Committee, what are your wishes?
Move approval of the change order.
Moving for approval by Alder Broderick. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alder Keemer. Comments? None? How about the public? Hearing none, we'll take our vote. All in favor of approving that agreement with AECOM for the final design of the south segment phases 2 and 3 would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed would be no. That passes. Approval of an agreement with Transcendent Technologies for property tax software.
Yes, so currently we're looking at changing the property tax software for the treasurer's office. And Marcy actually used to work for the county treasurer's office, so when she came to us, she was able to provide a little bit of insight that we could actually go on the county's software system, and that would make a few things easier from a workflow perspective, just because right now we both run separate systems. We're pulling our property records data from the county. That ends up being kind of an arduous process to make sure that the data all converts correctly. And then if taxes aren't paid, we're also transferring data to the county for those delinquent taxes, because after August 7th, the county collects our delinquent taxes for us. So looking to sort of streamline operations a little bit, this seems to be a good idea. And it also has some long-term cost savings. So I know in the memo I said that the upfront was going to be $17,000, but I also noted that, you know, if we run into unexpected issues, this could increase. And we did run into one issue with the extra penalty that the county currently charges. The county charges an extra 0.5% per month penalty on delinquent taxes. We do not as a city. So that's going to require some additional customization. We looked into, could we just add that additional 0.5% penalty? Worked with the city attorney's office, and unfortunately, we're not allowed to do that as a city. That's something that only counties or a certain size of a municipality can do. So that requires some additional customization. So what they had proposed was an upfront cost of $31,400, and then an annual fee of $5,150, which the annual fee that compares to what we would be currently paying, which is $12,596 for 2026. So there is some significant, you know, operational savings there. We just got an email back from them because we kind of countered and said, you know, this is a big cost increase for us. They sharpened their pencil a little bit and came down to an implementation cost of $29,000 and an annual fee of $4,600, which would save, your annual savings there then would be almost $8,000. It'd be $7,996 in annual savings. So making that $29,000 investment, I'm calculating a payback of 3.63 years. So even though we were hoping for a 2-year payback, which would have been awesome, and it would have been, you know, really a fantastic deal financially, doesn't look like it's going to be a 2-year payback, but it should still pay for itself, you know, within 4 years.
And I guess my question for Marcy would be too, with your familiarity of that too, would you think it'll increase the efficiency within the office as far as the amount of time it takes to move information?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think there's also, it's hard to monetize that, but that's also, I think, a significant factor as well, because time is money as well. So, committee, what are your wishes?
I will move approval of the agreement with Transcendent Technologies.
Okay, and we have the motion by Keemer. Is there a second?
I'll second, and I have a question as well.
Okay, second by Broderick. Question by Alder Broderick.
So I'll put on my sysadmin hat for a minute. It is sometimes difficult when you look at a situation where you have two separate entities kind of combining into one software instance. Obviously, the administrative overhead from the primary environment, you know, potentially goes up quite a bit. has the county expressed any concerns about us kind of like tagging on and what that might do for their management, or am I misunderstanding like how these will combine?
Sure. So we've been working with the county on this, and basically we needed their permission to do this. So when we were able to get them on board that they think that this is a good idea as well, that they think it'll help, I think, streamline some things on their end as well if we're all on the same.
The Register of
software
Deeds
system.
office was especially excited about it because it's a lot less transferring data back and forth.
Excellent.
Being on the same page sometimes helps efficiencies both directions, yeah. So, all right. We have the motion and the second. Any comments from the public? Hearing none, we shall take a vote. All in favor of approving that agreement for the property tax software would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed would be no. That is unanimous as well. We now have approval of claims paid. Any of them that you want to highlight, Comptroller?
So we did have the lottery credit settlements with the county and the school district. So basically, there's a lottery credit on your tax bill. We receive that money, and then we forward a portion of it on to the different taxing jurisdictions. And then also, we did pay our annual subsidies to both transit and airport. So those are subsidies that are, or those are operations that are subsidized by the general fund, so we did pay those out as well so that they have money for operating for 2025.
Any other items that any committee members have questions on? I'd remind you too, if there ever are anything that you see that you'd like to pick his brain on, whenever I do, whenever I talk to Corey, he's always very quick to try to get me an answer, so I'd encourage you to do that as well. Hearing none, a motion to approve the claims paid would be in order.
So moved.
Move for approval by Alder Morrow. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alder Keemer. All in favor of that motion of approving claims paid would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed would be no. That passes unanimously. That takes us to item number 13, adjourning into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes. Wrong. Approximately 7:10 p.m. No. The state statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session on the following: negotiating the acquisition of real estate and temporary limited easements for the Business 51 project. This requires a roll call.
Morrow?
Aye.
Shuda?
Oh, did we get a motion in a second?
We need a motion,
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Motion to go into closed session,
Motion
please.
by Alder Morrow. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Broderick, was a little bit quicker. That's a roll call.
Okay. Morrow?
Aye.
Shuda?
Aye.
Keemer?
Aye.
Broderick?
Aye.
Christensen?
Aye, and we are closed session. It's 9:42, we're back in open session. Does anyone have a motion on the committee that they would like to offer?
I'll move to proceed with negotiations as discussed during closed session.
Okay, Alder Keemer has her motion to
I second.
approve negotiations as discussed in closed session, and the second by Alder Morrow. All in favor of that motion would signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, and opposed would be no. And that passes unanimously. It's 9:43, and we stand adjourned.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.